Well, if you want a really in-depth analysis, of course, it would take maybe several hours, and I would suggest people to go my latest book, because this is a book which culminates my confession series, in which I reveal how Bergoglio rigged the conclave with 80% of his cardinals. The result is inevitably woke, is inevitably in the image of Pope Francis, is inevitably in the image of the Vatican II, which Pope Francis said was only 50% unfolded within the teachings of the present church. And already we have seen that by unfolding such teachings, the Catholic Church has had a lot of problems. I mean, empty churches, people leaving for maybe embracing other forms of Christianity like Orthodoxy. And this is because, of course, the Jesuits have taken over after the Second Vatican Council. Gradually, they had opposition, of course, from John Paul II and Ratzinger, who were much more conservative, who wanted to commission the Jesuits, as I explained in my latest book. But then, of course, they managed to do a coup d'etat, remove Joseph Ratzinger, also with the help of the infamous St. Gallen Mafia, which we could also go into if you want to. And of course, at that point, with a Jesuit Pope, now they have, like I said a moment ago, rigged the conclave. And so it's a question of mathematics. You need 2/3 to elect a Pope, and you have more than enough. You have to think that Bergoglio was there nominating cardinals until the last minute of his papacy. I mean, he was just like in December still nominating and elevating cardinals, and he was still signing documents until the last minute. Pope Francis has done enough to make sure that this is the last papacy as we know it, meaning that he has implemented last year a special document on the 30th of June, which I discuss in my latest book, which is a ticking time bomb in the papacy. It's an historical evidence that Ignatius of Antioch, so one of the historians who really pushed for the papacy and legitimated the papacy with historical accounts. So you have, the St. Peter, then other popes, all the way down to the latest one, is actually an artificial construct, because for the first couple of 100 years, there was an absolute no need of papacy. The artificial construct around Peter as the Pope is what really led Rome to make out of the papacy this supreme Pontifex Maximus, which, as you know, was a figure that already existed in ancient Rome in regards to pagan beliefs. So now they want to reveal it to the world. And you will say, wow, the Jesuits are finally doing a good thing. Finally revealing the truth. What is their interest in doing so? That is the problem. The interest is that they want to usher in the one-world religion, and the papacy see as a limitation for the union of all Christian churches. So by stepping down and saying, I'm only the Bishop of Rome, and that's the only thing you have to call me, that is where he can get then the orthodoxy all together with the evangelical and every other branch of Protestantism, to indulge into the first shape up that will culminate after with the union with the Muslims, the Jews, the Buddhists, which has been part of the encyclical project of Fratelli Tutti of Pope Francis in the middle of the pandemic. But it started, like I said already, and I wrote in volume 6.66 of my Confessions, from the Abu Dhabi meeting with the Imam of Al-Azhar. And it is because the Jesuits have been always involved with other religions, other faiths. They have always been involved with mathematics, astronomy. They were the founders of the first astronomical center of relevance in Rome, with the Collegium Romanum, their first university that later on will become known as what we have today, the Università del Laterano, the Pontifical University of the Lateran, and together with the Pontifical Institute and all that is all part of the Jesuits, who, of course, have always had a hand in molding and crafting the image of Jesus that is out there in the public. I mean, when you're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, or you're talking about any other discovery of relevance, the Jesuits will intervene and control the narrative to make sure that Rome was always respected. Because it's not about Jesus here. It's about the power of ancient Rome that filters through the Jesuits, who had built their first and most relevant and important astronomical center and second university after the one in Messina on the residues of the temple of Isis, because they were and they are worshippers of the mother goddess Isis. And also Cybele, for example, the Basilica of Saint Mary Major, Maria Maggiore, is built on the relics of that temple. So it's about reflecting all this then in their alleged worship to the Holy Mary, which is just a cover-up, for ISIS. I mean, when Ignazio Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, in Montserrat, I don't know if you went to Montserrat, beautiful place.
Montserrat, I know about it, but I've never been there.
It's a beautiful place. I would advise you to go there anyway, because it's an experience. It's just an hour and something out. You can take a bus from Barcelona. I went there when I was very young with my grandmother, and I found myself in the shadow of this mountain. Then you have this cave with this beautiful monastery, Benedictine monastery, this image of the Black Mary that inspired, they say, Ignatius of Loyola, who then himself went to the nearby cave in Marresa, near Marresa, there, and then received what he claims were his divinely inspired spiritual exercise, which are, of course, a way to create an egregore, a fourth form of that generates power for the newly established reality that became later on the Jesuits. And then, of course, the mission of the Jesuits, unprecedented, retrieving occult power and religious knowledge from all over the world, sending people like Ippolito Desideri in Tibet, Matteo Ricci in China, Francis Xavier in Japan, Philippines, everywhere. It was about not only missionary work. Missionary work is the cover-up. In reality, you see it from the vow of the Jesuits, the fourth vow, the vow that not all Jesuits take of absolute obedience to the Pope. That is nothing Christians about that. It's about, because if you start working with the Vatican, inevitably you will become compromised, because they will tell you, okay, well, we can say this, but we can, this one, let's leave it on the side. This one, better not to reveal this. So this is the way the Jesuits work. Their mission of education became the alternative to the mission of banking that was of the Knights Templars, that vacuum they were filling in their historical perspective of the church that was missing that military element to fight the Reformation. So the Jesuits go to the Far East, but also go to England, infiltrate the Protestants, try to kill Elizabeth I, who at that point counteracts by founding the very first intelligence that is now the most known intelligence in the world, with John D. 007 and with everybody else who was at Her Majesty's service. But in the meantime, of course, the Jesuits created with the Vatican the Holy Alliance, which became the Vatican Intelligence Unit, and then later on known as the Entity. And that intelligence unit has today the largest archive in history in La Spezia, there where Ignazio Loyola started his career. So was he divinely inspired? Well, he was inspired by the Alumbrados, who were the Illuminati of the time. The Illuminati of the time mixing, that Iberic Peninsula was a big problem, and that's why the Inquisition was working 24 hours a day to expel, kill, murder, silence everybody, because you had a big Jewish presence and a big Muslim presence, and of course you had Islamic mysticism, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, and all that filtered through the Alumbrados, who of course became a group that attracted the attention of this young soldier, Ignazio Loyola, of noble birth. He was arrested by the Inquisition several times before founding the order, and eventually he will arrive in France, and in Montmartre in 1534 with 6 other friends, he founded the Jesuits, and then only after 6 years they eventually became, first arrived in Italy and managed to become priests with papal approval, and then later on they will have their order approved in 1540, because the Pope saw that at the time, the only ones in charge were the Dominicans, but they were not insidious and prepared and military enough like the Jesuits. Now, the Jesuits formally didn't want to be like the military religious order that were the Knights Templars. There is very specific differences here. But they wanted to be military in their structure. In fact, there's a general on top, superior general, who is also known as the Black Pope. But because they are not perceived as a threat, because they present themselves as priests,
Right.
They are not perceived as a secret society. They actually are, because they have the free vows Jesuits, they have their coadjutors who don't take the priesthood and are still Jesuits. They have the fifth class, which are even people who are not even Catholic necessarily, who work for the Jesuit order to this day.